Hi there, Gunnar here again. I'm back. Yeah, I was last time I was broadcasting. I didn't really feel that well, but a bit of a. I usually don't get depressed, but I was a little bit under the weather. Things are better today. The climate has been much nicer the last couple of days, so yeah, I'm looking forward to the coming week here now. Next week, I will be turning 60 on Saturday, so I'm sort of planning a little bit for that also. Um, I should do some sort of projects this week, I think, trying to figure out like 7 great things to do and complete within this week. But I'll be back with about that tomorrow. But I'm thinking tomorrow I'll do some birding, so that'll be like one thing, and I also want to do like a long run. I'd like to complete a few blog posts and yeah, I don't know. We'll see what I come up with, but like 7 great little projects for 7 days that are still there in my 50s, and then on next Saturday I'll be 60. I don't really feel like 60. I feel more like, I don't know, 25, I think. I don't know. But my brain is all over the place. I got projects to do. I want to do, and sometimes it's kind of hard to realize that wow, 60 years almost has passed since I came to this planet. A lot of water has run under the bridge since, and yeah, it's been an interesting ride. It's my second life here in Peru with 2 kids and a wonderful wife. We have been together this year actually for 25 years, so that's another celebration that comes up. My daughter has her birthday on 31st of July. She's turning 11. My other daughter is 13. So within this next month, we have a lot to celebrate. Maybe not the best of times. I've with this COVID everything. Economy is very strained right now. I'm like looking being very frugal in terms of what I'm putting my money on. I'm looking over all these sort of subscriptions I have. If there's any subscription that I have that I could get rid of, I'm looking all over that. I'm decided not to buy any sort of things that are not really necessary in terms of eating and drinking. So it's like no zero alcohol. Maybe I'll have some wine or something on my birthday, but apart from that, I'll be really frugal, and just trying to be save up a little bit of money for these coming months now when we don't have any work. One very important thing I think, though, is that I need to get more people to book trips for later in the year and for next year. And if you haven't done so already, please check out colibriexpeditions.com and Seven Wonders Birding for trips for like the last 2-3 months. As I was mentioning before, there's a confirmed Central Peru trip in October, which should run if we have flights coming, and it looks like flights are going to start on the 1st of October, so we're looking forward to that. And yeah, and then other trips will be are already in plan for 2021. But you can sign up for these already, and reserve your places on those tours. One tour that I must mention now also, because I talked to a friend of mine in Japan, it's getting very full in the reservations for Blackestone's fish owl and the hides. So anyone that want to take my short Japan tour with me next year, it's already on the Seven Wonders Birding website. Yeah, you should start planning that now. And if those dates don't fit you and you still want to do that itinerary, please get back to me. I may be able to double the dates or even change the dates if it's if the dates don't fit you, right? So check that out. Now today I've been looking over these forums for the threatened birds, and I meant to do that a long time ago. BirdLife International is doing, well, I think they do a yearly or at least a bi-yearly sort of upgrade on the threat status of different birds. And when I looked into that now, I figured, okay, well, let's see what they're writing about the Junin Grebe. And much to my surprise, they are thinking of downgrading the Junin Grebe to just endangered. Now, the basis of this is that they feel that the numbers have been pretty constant since the 90s. It's been, well, the thing is that when you try to count the Junin Grebe, you have to try to count all the bird at once, which is impossible. The lake is just too big. There's loads of reed areas, but you try to do this during the time of year when they're all sort of gathering in the deep water. And then you are likely to count the major part of the population. And the problem is that when you look at the numbers from one year to the other, the fluctuations may be in the sort of 20–30% ratio from one year to the other. Is that the real number, or is that just an error from the census technique, that it's not sensitive enough, that you can't really count the whole population in that way? And since there is no sort of standards for following the population throughout the years, except for what we have been doing, Colibri Expeditions have been funding the surveys, like a daily survey from 2 different points on the reeds, on the reed edge, counting how many birds are seen on a daily basis and sort of counting how many juveniles, etc. So all that data has been collected during 2 years, and Colibri Expeditions have financed that together with some funding from you guys that helped out in the early stages of this. And we've been paying Cesar Ceballos in the area so he can be doing the counts there on a daily basis. Yeah. Now we had to stop this last year. I think it was like September, October, or something like that. We did not have a lot of bookings coming in, and I could simply not afford to have an extra account post. And then came this stuff, right? So, but I heard from Cesar about a month ago, and he was telling me quite worrying news about the Junin Lake. It turns out that there is now trout in the lake, and well, we've known that for some time now, but they went out and they caught some huge trout. I mean, they were like big. I don't want to measure exactly how big they were, but they were big trouts. They could easily eat like a little chick Junin Grebe if they wanted to. But not only that could they eat greblings, but they could also eat all the food, right? If they're so big. The Junin Grebes lives mainly off Orestia's fish. That's like the main source of food items that they eat. And if the Orestia's fish are, well, if there's competition for the fish, and we will know that well, we do know that the trout is predatory on other small fish, they will go for the same source. And that is worrying per se. But that's not the worst thing. So the worst thing is actually what they also confirmed in the lake is that they are now fishing with gill nets, with these fine nylon gill nets, which we already know has been a major factor when it comes to diminishing grebe populations in many areas, including the Titicaca grebe that was having real problems in the early 2000s. And they had totally disappeared from many areas around the Titicaca Lake. And the main reason, as we could see, looking at the numbers and so forth and looking at the threat picture, was the use of these gill nets that had been introduced like 20–30 years ago. Yeah. And little by little, that population just went on the brink to like yeah. It was for a while it was listed as critical, and then it was sort of down to endangered, and now I think it's listed as if it's vulnerable or near threatened. I mean, it's lowered its threat status in the last decade or last 15 years or so. And this is mainly because the use of gill nets have actually, well, I shouldn't say it has ended, but it's more regulated now. And the thing that regulates it is that they've introduced trout farming in the lake with pools. Now that per se is not very ecologically sustainable because there's a lot of nutrients coming leaking into the lake. And there's also escapees, of course, and that will be a threat to the Rarest population within the lake. Yeah, so and the same, it's the same situation there. Also, there's endemic fish species, Rarest fish species, in the lake, and so trout introduced there is a problem. There's also endemic frogs that are also threatened by this voracious predator. That's not the only predator in the Titicaca Lake. They also have the pejerrey, the kingfish, which is another introduced predator, and which was the main sort of fish that was fished with the gill nets before the trouts. So what happens is with the trout farms is that the trout farms don't want to have any fishermen nearby, so they will sort of chase away anyone that wants to lay their nets there, and it becomes sort of a sanctuary for the Titicaca grebes there. And so the population has increased again, and it's now, you know, the population is fairly good. It's not hard to find the Titicaca grebe anymore in the Titicaca Lake, so they've had a few good years. But I'm quite concerned what will happen with the Junin Grebe, and especially if they downgrade it to endangered. You know, that will be sort of saying that yes, the conservation measures that we have done, which is like nothing has been done, has worked, and that is absolutely not the case. There is very little control still about the pollution, the regulation of the how the and very little studied also how the lake is regulated, so the water level will go up and down, and how this affects the population of the Junin Grebe is not known. Maybe the data that we have for 2 years can show, make some correlations on that. We don't know yet. If anyone is feeling like wanting to analyze the data that we have, let me know. Send me a message, send me an email to colibri with K, colibriexp@gmail.com, and that would be great help. And then, you know, maybe we can try to prepare a paper together or whatever. But there is data to analyze, and maybe we can get some, you know, some interesting showing some interesting results from this data, which would be great. So those are threats, but now we have this new threat of the trout in the lake, and we'll see what the BirdLife decides in the end. But for the time being, it looked like they pretty much were going forward and saying that, well, the numbers have been pretty constant and actually increasing. The last count that was made, maybe it was a very efficient count with was over 400, but there's a series of factors that make the counting very difficult. First of all, we have the problems of separating the Junin Grebe from the silvery grebe. Now, if you see them side by side, it's usually not a problem, right? But if we take into account that a young Junin Grebe will have a shorter bill, there will be some overlap there with a bill size very close to the size of the bill of a silvery grebe, and they are very similar in plumage. They have different postures, but if they turn around slightly, you know, you don't see some of the features and the jizz of the bird. And then they're skittish as well. And you're doing the counts well, you're not doing it from like a stable platform, but rather from a rocky boat. And you do transects back and forth, and you have to do it. It's very hard to do everything during one day. You need a lot of personnel for that. So they go out a second day and do the rest of the lake, which means that the birds can actually move in between the areas between that time. So it's extremely hard to get very accurate number of the exact number of birds that you have in the lake at one specific time. So yeah, that's great if there's 400, but we don't even know if it was only 200 back in the 90s, or if that was also part of an artifact. Maybe it was undercounted somewhat. So what is the actual number? Well, we don't, it's very, very hard to say, right? So anyway, so that's about that. We'll see what BirdLife decides in the end. Hummingbirds. I've been telling you about my 1,000 birds project, the 1,000 best birds of the world. And I've been using, as I mentioned in an earlier vlog here, there are two sources that I have, two books. It's Oliver Austin's and Arthur Singer's great book called The Birds of the World, published in 1961, I think, the first edition. I got a Swedish edition, and I think this is actually from the 80s sometimes, and that was like when the spark lit in me to go watching birds around the world. And I saw all these wonderful paintings. They're fantastic illustrations in this book, and you should really get it. There is a link to in a previous vlog that I did, but you can check it out again. It's on Amazon.com/shop/Engblom.gunner. No, /Birding Peru, I think. Yeah, let me just double check that for you. So Amazon, yeah, Amazon.com/shop/Engblom.gunner. Yeah, that's the so you can find the books there that I'm recommending. So there's also that one, and it's Perrin's book, which is like the Encyclopedia of Birds, also in a lot of different editions. It's out of print, of course, but you can find it also secondhand or in good use. There is also another book that a friend of mine has been the editor for, Eric Hirschfeld. It's The World's Rarest Birds, and it has really nice accounts of the most threatened birds. So that's another category that I include in the 1,000 birds. It should be, I'm trying to include all the endangered and the critical birds that are possible to see, right? Not if they are extremely difficult, and you have to mount an expedition and you're still not sure that you will see it, and maybe it's on an isolated island, or if it's only historical records and so forth, then it's not on the list. So yeah, don't worry. Ivory-billed woodpecker is not on the 1,000 birds, best birds. You must have like a reasonable chance of seeing it, right? You may have to do some effort sometimes, but it should still be sort of possible. So I'm trying to compile a list of the 1,000 best birds, and I'm also using the handbook of the Birds of the World. I'm using the illustrated checklist of the Birds of the World. So it's in 2 volumes. So as I go through all these lists and the BirdLife list of the endangered and the critical ones, I've come up with 65 species of hummingbirds to include on the list. Now, if I keep on doing it like this, I'm going to go over 1,000. So I'm thinking of maybe putting in a few restrictions and how to reduce the numbers. And what I have been doing, and I would probably have to do that a little bit harder, is that the sort of very common species that are included in these 2 references that I have, the book by Austin and Singer and the Perrin's book, if those species are very common or very sort of insignificant and not really making it compared to other birds, I will simply put those on a separate list that they didn't quite make it. So I'm trying to get the 1,000 best birds. But I will probably have to narrow down the hummingbirds somewhat. So I'm thinking of doing like a poll on 363 hummingbirds, which is a Facebook group that I am managing together with Osvaldo and a few Osvaldo Cortez from Colombia and a few other admins on that. And so that could be like a nice little project. I've already checked that you can actually do a poll with more than 65 different options on Facebook. So maybe I'll get you to choose 20 or so, and then we'll see which ones are the ones that are most popular and see which ones don't get any votes at all. But we'll see. That will maybe one of the projects I do before my 60th birthday next week. Okay, what else have we got here? Yeah, tomorrow I'm going to Lomas de Asia. It's one of these local birding excursions that I've started for new birders in the Lima area. Okay, this project, it's not gonna by any means replace what we've been doing with colibri expeditions before. It's just pocket money basically, but it still feels a little, somewhat like a like a call, something like a good thing to do. It's good to get new people into birding. So it feels very satisfying to be able to do that, and to show people that have not been out birding before new birds and get them into the hobby. And I think this approach is the right one. I'm not reaching as many people as I would like, but still I think it's still very, very satisfying that I can get a few people into this wonderful thing of looking at birds. And yeah, I will be continuing doing that. I'm still offering the free guiding in the weeks. So anyone in Lima that sort of relatively close to the district where I live, they can simply send me an email or message and ask me if I can guide them for an hour and a half in the park next to where they live, and I'll do that for free. So hopefully that way we can sort of build a little group of people wanting to do some longer excursions for pay as well. And but it's still very reasonably priced for the people taking part of this. I'm charging less than $20 per person for the excursion, full day excursion tomorrow. So you can imagine it's not, yeah. It's a little bit help of getting groceries and stuff. I cannot still afford to buy any beers on those kind of monies. Anyway, so next thing here, what on my list of things is that, yeah, yesterday I listened to a podcast and there was a meeting with some of my friends, birding friends in Cusco, the local guides there. Alex Durand, who has been working as a guide for colibri expeditions and still working for us every once and so often, and will be guiding also one of the excursions that we are having in the Cusco area for the Fiestas Patrias. He was one of the people in the panel, and there was Miguel Lezama from Tanager Tours, Dani Valdez, and two other guys, William and Juan Jose, and they were talking about an excursion that they did to a nearby area in Cusco. They went to a new resource there called Encifra Camp. It's a guy there that has put up a feeding station for hummingbirds and seed eaters as well, and made trails and so forth. A really, really great birding resource between Urubamba and Ollantaytambo, you go up into the mountains basically, and it's a very good place to see the sword-billed hummingbird, and hence the name Ensiphera camp, right? Ensiphera is the genus of the sword-billed hummingbird. But you also see great things like chestnut-breasted mountain finch there and so forth. And so they had been up there, and they tried to keep the protocols, you know, like social distancing, face masks, etc. And they encountered some actual, well, no problems, at least challenges that we have to think about when we are doing these tours. And it was a very interesting conversation that was had. One thing was, okay, first of all, everyone should have a mask. The best masks around are the N95. But if you put an N95 on and you hiking, for one thing, at altitude, you're going to run out of breath. Secondly, it's very hard to birdwatch with a face mask on because you will fog up your binoculars all the time. So when I've been out now, also during my, we use the face masks, but of course, sort of it comes down just over the mouth and not over the nose, because if it goes over the nose, all that air that you breathe out will come up between your eyes basically and the cheek, you know, between your nose, and then you fog up your binoculars completely. So it's almost necessary to pull down the mask a little bit. So that's one thing. So while you're in the group, the only thing you can actually do then is to keep the distance. If you sort of are going to have any sort of effective social distancing, and especially when one does one-day tours. Now, if a group of people are together for a longer period of time, well, at least you can sort of monitor each other and you see whether or not anyone shows any symptoms over, say, you know, over 2 weeks or whatever a birding trip takes, right? And then if there was anyone carrying the virus before the trip started, well, pretty much everyone in the group would be susceptible to the virus anyway. So obviously one thing for groups coming in would be to do the test before you actually travel. So you do a COVID test before you travel. You also take temperature, of course, before you actually board the bus. And even though the seats are going to be apart, etc., I think in reality that will have to be seen like a unit. Of course, we're going to try to minimize the contact between each other, but it will be very, very hard in terms of actually ensuring that 100%. Now, the birding groups per se are small. That's one thing. I think also birders in general are very well educated, so they know about social distancing much, much better than a whole, like a big part of the population, so they can monitor that before the trip, etc., and you know, trying to keep safe. There was an additional item also mentioned, and this is interesting. It was the how do we share the telescope? How can we share the telescope, and you know, and still doing that safely without having any additional interaction? So the way I have been doing that on my day tour, I should probably do it a little bit better, but is to clean the scope with alcohol. Now, one thing that was mentioned there, well, what about the lenses? Can you actually clean the lenses with alcohol? So I'm throwing out the questions to you guys. Can you? Would it be detrimental to the coating, the anti-reflex coating that you have on the oculars, to wipe it with alcohol between every user? Can you do that? Or should you just, you know, try to get the ocular up a little bit so you don't actually touch the glass, and then keeping the other areas and clean those. I think that would be probably more possible, but maybe every once in so often you need to actually clean the lens also with alcohol. And can you do that with 70% or 98%, or will that be detrimental to the coating? I don't know. You tell me. So anyway, tomorrow is my excursion, so I will be trying to use some of these ideas out there in the field, how to keep a distance. And I think it's more important on our day tours than it may be, as I said, for anyone coming from abroad to Peru to do a tour, because then, as I said, we will be monitoring each other, and obviously that would sort of help containing the at least us as a unit and a group. But we don't know when people come from different areas and just visit for a day, what kind of impact that will have. So it's quite important to keep the distance at that point. And obviously they have not done any transatlantic flights. They have not taken any COVID tests the last 2 days before they're doing this excursions and so forth. Having said that, Lima is one of the areas where the numbers are still sort of in, well, I shouldn't say control, but at least not as bad as in other areas of Peru, and especially not in the districts. The districts around Miraflores, where I live and where the people are coming from, going on the excursions. So I don't feel too worried, I must say, because people are taking a lot of care. But yeah, and the group is very small also. I think we only have like 3 people tomorrow, so, and there will be like 1 seat in between each other. So, and the car will be sterilized with alcohol before we go, and everyone will wear a face mask. In the front will wear the visor also for driving. There will be no air condition on, and yeah, so hopefully that will work. Anyway, that's all I had to say for today. I'll see you here next time, and yeah, please comment. Take care, and good night.